Porsche 911. A simple idea, yet anything but a simple model lineup. Could this new 911 Carrera T, complete with a manual gearbox and the lowest powered engine in the range, be the best of the bunch? So you're probably already scoffing into your YouTube feed about, GT3s, GT3 RSs, GT2s, turbos, GTSs. I mean, there's a 911 for everyone, isn't there? And that is exactly why it sort of straddles that sports car to supercar breed so perfectly. But the 911 Carrera T that we've got here really is an interesting option because it's one of the more affordable 911s out there for a start. And also it takes all the sort of everyday usable goodness of the basic 911 Carrera, which is itself both fast and wonderful. And then it sort of just adds a bit of interest to it, makes it a little tiny bit sportier. So you get the standard 379 brake horsepower flat six twin turbo, exactly the same as in the Carrera. But with the T, you can only have it as a coupe. You can only have it with a 7-speed manual gearbox, which you can't get on the Carrera. It also gets a mechanical limited slip diff. It is also lighter, so you've got thinner windows, you've got a lighter battery, and you can also have the rear seats removed if you wish. So it's kind of got all that goodness of the Carrera, but just with a little bit of GT edginess added. Otherwise, the interior is much the same in the T as it is in other 911s, which is no bad thing, let's face it. But the Carrera T also costs over £100,000. That's some £9,000 more than the standard Carrera and only around £4,000 less than a usefully more powerful Carrera S that also gets a manual gearbox. So are you paying more for less? Well, it's a good question that, isn't it? And I mean, this is something that the 911 is particularly good at, is that there's so many options, just myriad options in the 911 range. And it can feel, especially if you go for one of the sort of sportier ones, like you're paying tens of thousands to have the carpet removed. So, and I think at first glance, on paper, I think the 911, the T, can feel the same as well. You're like, well, why not just have a standard Carrera and then I'll have the automatic and I'll get, thicker glass and all of that stuff and for less. So I think if you look at it from that perspective, I can see why you might think that. But I genuinely think this car makes a lot of sense, actually. It does feel like one of those niches in the range, perhaps. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just one of those purist enthusiast things. But the combination of factors that the T has, I think, works so well in the UK specifically. And there's that certain breed of enthusiast, isn't there, that mutters around pub tables about wanting manual gearboxes and not too much power and rear-wheel drive and that simple layout. And that is kind of what this sort of specialises in. And it just feels so right, this car. So our test car has got the 20-inch wheels at the front, 21s at the back, and which is standard for the T. And it's also got the optional 4-wheel steer, which is an option that you can't have on the Carrera, by the way. That's really the only significant option that this test car's got beyond a few little style bits and upgraded lights and sound system, that kind of stuff. So you're looking at a fairly standard, by the standards of the sort of people going to buy a Porsche, 911 Carrera T here. But that 4-wheel steer does make a difference because it's a fairly big car these days, the 911, and still reasonably weighty, although with those weight saving measures and with the seats out at the back, we're talking about 1,470 kilos, which is not bad. And you can twizzle your drive mode switch down here. I love the fact that it's on the steering wheel. I love the fact that the steering wheel's nice and simple. There's not too many buttons on it. Sport, or Sport Plus if you're feeling really fruity. And it is just a joy, this thing. As for that meaty manual gear shift, well, it really does add to the experience of driving the 911. And the pedals are placed perfectly for heeling and towing, or there is an auto rev match function if you want it. The noise that the engine makes is wonderful, and I love the fact that the exhaust as well and the dampers, you can control those independently via these very nice shortcut buttons here. That is as it should be. Adaptive dampers are standard. The way the T rides, it's a little bit fidgety at times, but I think that's partly just because it's quite a stiff car in terms of the actual torsional rigidity, as well as the actual damping and the springs and this kind of thing. So you do get that slight sense of it being a bit firm, but actually it's still composed enough and the actual bump absorption is really good. More than that, oh my God, it's just so good. And that 4-wheel steer really helps to make it feel a little bit more, I think, a bit neater in corners. It sort of tucks in really nicely. Some 4-wheel steer systems, some of the older ones really, you don't see it so much now, but they actually tended to make cars feel a bit nervous and a bit unpredictable, but not so here. You don't really know that the system's working. It just makes it feel really good as you kind of jink through corners. It is wonderful to drive, and I just think because it's not too powerful, so you're still talking about 4.7 seconds to 62 miles an hour. It's still really fast, this car. It's got 180 mile an hour top speed. This is not a slow car. The standard Carrera isn't a slow car. It still feels like a proper thoroughbred sports car. And I like the fact that it's actually manageable. I like the fact that it's rear wheel drive, so you get that real shove from the back and it feels quite poised and lovely through corners, and yet it doesn't feel scary. It feels really well judged for UK roads, which, to be honest, where can you use more power than that? Where can you use more performance than that? It is sort of perhaps the 911 designed for fusty old enthusiast Brits like me, I suppose. And I love it for that. I love the fact that it's such a kind of niche thing, and yet I suspect that it will actually be one of the more popular cars. I love the fact that it's one of the more affordable 911s, and yet it feels a bit special, a bit naughty. And yet it also has all of that usability and, you know, everyday goodness of the standard 911 and the standard Carrera. It's great. It just works so well, and it makes so much sense. I think I would, you know, maybe I'd even leave the rear seats in. I mean, I'm not sure how much of a difference that's going to make, but it is, It's a funny thing about 911s, isn't it? I have a funny relationship because I love the Porsche 911, and yet whenever I sit there and have the conversation about what, you know, sports or super sports or supercar you would get, I always think I'd go more flamboyant. I'd have a McLaren or, you know, anything. Like, even when the F-Type came out and I looked at that in the 911 and I thought, oh, maybe, you know, talking years and years ago now, I know, but I always think I'd go for the more theatrical option when I'm sat around a table discussing it. The second I get into a Porsche 911, I know that the reality is, if I had the money, I would try and go to the McLaren dealership or the Maserati dealership or the Lotus dealership, and I'd be so close to handing over that cash, and then at the last moment I'd think, oh, but those Porsches, 911 is so good. It's so good. It just does everything so well, and sometimes I think it does it too well, and maybe it's not fun enough at normal road speeds, and that's why I sometimes think I'd go more theatrical. But every time I get into a 911, I think that's nonsense. It is fun enough at normal road speeds. It's just so much better than everything else at everything. You know, why wouldn't you buy this? And I think if I were in that position and I had the cash and I walked into the Porsche dealership and I wanted a 911, well, I'd be sorely tempted by the GTS, I won't lie, because I do love the GTS. But it would be that or this for me, because I really, really love this. And there you have it. Niche it may be, but the Carrera T, well, it might even be the best 911. Don't forget to head to CarGurus.co.uk for a whole host of fantastic used cars, including quite a few nice 911s, I'm sure. And while we've got you, please do like the video, subscribe to the CarGurus UK YouTube channel, and turn your notifications on so that you don't miss any of our videos.